What is going on, guys? Today we are going to talk about maybe the sleeper of the year, even though it's 9 days into 2025, and that is the Saucony Ride 18, which is meant to be Saucony's everyday daily trainer. Not too premium, but also not bargain or budget. So let's get right into it. This is a non plated daily running trainer from Saucony, the Ride 18. As always, we're going to start out with the outsole and the traction performance of the shoe. So as you can see, we have an XT900 rubber outsole from Saucony. And I live in California, so I mostly tested this shoe in dry weather conditions on the road with, a couple times where there was street cleaning or it was a little bit wet after it rained a little bit. And I'm happy to report that the outsole held up very well in the mostly dry conditions, as well as the times where there were a couple puddles, but I was mostly trying to avoid them. But it did feel a little bit more sus when it got a little bit wet or a little bit more moist. But I had never slipped once in the Saucony Ride 18, so I think that they actually did a good job when it comes to traction. Now, when it comes to snowy or icy conditions, not exactly sure how that's going to perform, as I have not tested the shoe in those conditions, but I have an inkling that I don't think it'll perform super well. But if you're running in mostly dry weather conditions on the road or slightly wet conditions, I think you're going to be okay with this traction on the outsole. Now, let's talk about durability, which I think is one of the Saucony Ride 18's strength. The XT900 rubber outsole, I believe, is the same as a lot of other Saucony's shoes. I have a couple other models of the Triumph as well as the Endorphin Speeds, and I believe that they all use the XT900 rubber outsole. Someone please fact check me in the comment section down below, but in my experience, Saucony shoes are some of the longest lasting outsoles that you can buy. And with 30 miles on my pair, I'm seeing almost no wear on the outsole. There are etchings on the outsole that are starting to wear away a little bit, but that's only in the super high wear areas, which for me are in the lateral heel part of the shoe as well as a little bit in the forefoot, but it's definitely less than what I've seen in other daily trainers that I've tested. So overall, I know it's non-conclusive, but I think that the Saucony Ride 18 is going to last a very long time. That's just speculation. If anyone has the Ride 18s with them, please let us know your experience with durability and how your pair is holding up. Now, moving on to the main event, which is kind of what surprised me about the Ride 18 and why I feel that it is such a sleeper, is the midsole, which is a full-length Power Run Plus from Saucony, 35 millimeters in the heel, dropping to 27 millimeters in the forefoot, giving it an 8 millimeter heel to toe drop. And I think that this setup is phenomenal. Another thing I do want to note that I did mention in the first run review is that it does have a Power Run Plus insole, which to me is just an added bonus, and I think it really adds comfort to the shoe. Typically, a lot of running shoes have an ortholite insole, which is basically just memory foam, and it's not adding any impact protection or actual cushion to your shoe, but this is definitely more expensive when it comes to insoles because it is made out of the same foam as the midsole. So that's why I think what adds extra comfort to this ride. Now, how did the midsole perform? I felt like it was excellent. Now, if you had the past Saucony Triumphs, the 20 or the 21, I personally have the Saucony Triumph 20. That Power Run Plus is definitely different than this Power Run Plus. This Power Run Plus is a little bit firmer, but it still gives you that nice bounce, especially as you pick up the pace. So it's not going to be exactly like the old Triumphs were, which I think some people were starting to think. As on my first run review, I did say that these were very bouncy, these were very comfortable, and some people commented, maybe, oh, is this like the old Triumph? But I don't want to say it's like the old Triumphs. It's a little bit more firm and a little bit more stable than the old Triumphs, which for me personally, I enjoy, just because when you have a lot of these high stack running shoes, it becomes unstable to a certain point, and especially during longer runs, for me personally, I don't like sinking into the shoe. I feel that it becomes way more unstable and it feels a little bit mushy for my liking. I like something that's a little bit more firm, stable, and responsive, which I believe this shoe gives. So you're going to have ample impact protection because of the higher stack height, and you're not going to feel sluggish in this shoe because it is a firmer, more stable foam, but it does provide that nice little bounce. So when I tested this shoe in different paces, I would say that this shoe definitely shines when you are running a little bit faster. For me, it was, 10K pace, half marathon pace, which for me is around anywhere from 7 minutes to 9 minutes per mile, this shoe was absolutely amazing because the bounce was kind of maximized, especially when I got into a rhythm while I was running. It felt so bouncy, it felt impact absorbent. The whole shoe just felt like an extension of my foot, and it was really enjoyable. Now, not to say that this shoe doesn't perform well in slower runs, which I did test the shoe on. Today was definitely a slower run in this shoe. I was struggling. My legs were feeling really heavy, but at around a 10 to 11 minute pace, which is my recovery pace or just like my jogging pace, this shoe felt a little bit maybe too firm. It's not, I would say, the best shoe to run your recovery runs in, or if your legs are feeling extra sore, you want something a little bit softer. This midsole is probably not going to be the best option, but it is still going to be able to take care of you during the slower runs. It's just not my first choice. If I were to choose, I would want a little bit softer of a setup, maybe a more max cushion shoe like the New Balance More V5, maybe the Asics Nova Blast 5. Those are some shoes that I feel like are a touch softer in the midsole than the Ride 18. But other than that, I would rather have my daily shoe or my daily trainer a little bit faster than too slow, because I think that you can always kind of run slower in a faster shoe, but you can't really run faster in a slower shoe, if that makes sense. Especially if you are only buying, one or two pairs of shoes, you want them to be as versatile as you can for your rotation and the runs that you have in your training plan. Now, moving on to the upper and fit, I think that the fit is probably the Achilles heel of the Saucony Ride 18, and the reason I say that is because I have a slightly wider than average foot, and I got my true size a size 12, and I do feel that the platform of this shoe, so it could be like a midsole issue slash upper issue, is that on the lateral side, my pinky was overflowing or kind of exposed on the right side of the shoe, on the right shoe, and it was bulging out a little bit, especially when I was flexing the shoe. It felt a little bit of uncomfort, but it didn't really cause any problems on my longer runs or my regular runs. It was just something that I would feel every now and then, especially when making a quick corner turn or turning while I was running. I definitely felt my foot kind of off the midsole, just my pinky toe. So if you do have a wider than average foot, I may recommend going to the wide option of the Saucony Ride 18. Now, I got the normal size 12, and I did feel that the rest of the fit was definitely fine. It was just that little problem of my pinky toe overflowing over the midsole, but also the forefoot lockdown was decent. I definitely had to tie the laces a little bit tighter, so this is where I kind of get into the caveat of, do I go for a wide option or do I go for a regular option? Because if I went with the wide option, I do feel like the forefoot space would be a little bit too much for my foot and I wouldn't be able to tighten the laces enough. But since I went normal sized, I have a little bit better of a foot fit in the forefoot, but my pinky toe is teetering over. So for me personally, I'd rather have my pinky toe teetering over just because it didn't bother me too much. It was just something to note. It basically made the fit not perfect for me, but the rest of the fit of the Saucony Ride 18 was great. Midfoot lockdown was exceptional, especially with the runner's loop and after I broke in the upper after a couple of runs. The heel lockdown was phenomenal, didn't have any problems with that. And honestly, the upper is super lightweight and super comfortable. It's really soft and definitely very breathable. Now, I did mention in my first run review that this shoe is more breathable than most shoes that I've tested recently, and I can confirm that that has not changed. This shoe is extremely breathable. It feels like you're riding in a convertible versus a hardtop car, and I personally really enjoyed it, even though, I don't really care about ventilation too much a lot of the times in running shoes because I don't really get blisters in my feet. Knock on wood, that doesn't start happening, but I really enjoyed having that airflow in my feet that I'm usually not used to. And last but not least, the upper is also just super lightweight. So I think that the breathability, since there is a thinner material and a softer material on this shoe, it just makes it a super lightweight upper. Now, I do want to note that I did say in the first run impression that I felt that the midsole was a little bit on the heavier side and the upper was on the lighter side. So that kind of creates a weird weight dynamic where you feel like the bottoms of your feet are a little bit heavier than the top of your foot. Like the top of my foot felt like I had nothing on, which is always a good thing in running shoes. But since the bottom of the shoe or the midsole was so substantial, I did feel like a little bit uneven weighting. Now the shoe overall feels pretty lightweight on my foot, but the balance or the weight on your foot feels a little bit different due to that chunkier midsole on the bottom. So if that's something that's important to you, I know that that's very niche or very interesting to talk about, but for me, I definitely noticed it compared to maybe like an Asics Nova Blast 5, which I don't have with me currently, or it's in a box right now. The Asics Nova Blast 5, the upper is less breathable, it's a little bit thicker, and I feel like the upper in general is just a little bit heavier, so the midsole being a little bit lighter on that shoe paired with a heavier upper makes the shoe feel a little bit more balanced and maybe less clunky, whereas this shoe feels a little bit more bottom heavy and a little bit more clunky while running. So that's just something to keep in mind. I know that that was very in depth and a little bit niche, so don't worry about it if that doesn't really matter to you. But I guess for my more seasoned runners, or sneaker connoisseurs kind of like me, who really care about the little nitty gritty of each shoe, that's definitely something to note. But overall, the shoe felt extremely lightweight, and I really enjoyed having a breathable top, whereas typically my foot be sweating in there, or not even sweating, but just be hot as hell. So that's going to pretty much wrap up my thoughts on the upper, as well as just the overall shoe in general. I think that this is actually a very underrated daily trainer. Now, like I said in my first run review, I haven't tested the Ride 17, which is last year's model, but I have tried it on. And to be honest, it felt completely different than when I ran in this shoe. So there's a couple factors to that. Maybe I didn't run in the Ride 17, so I can't really speak on that performance. But I just didn't enjoy the way that the Ride 17 fit my foot, as well as the underfoot experience. I know that I think it's the same midsole and the same insole, but I just felt like in the store, I just didn't feel that magic that I do feel in the Ride 18. So with that in mind, this price at $140, for me, someone who hasn't run in the Ride 17, I personally would recommend the Ride 18, just because I think it's a fantastic value. I think you're getting more than maybe what you're spending when it comes to value wise. And typically, I'm always an advocate of buying last year's model to save a little bit of money, especially when, there hasn't been a complete redesign. But I do truly believe that, especially if you're a heavier runner like myself, then, at 205 pounds, it really activates the midsole, and it provides a really spongy and really responsive feeling, or a springy feeling, if I might say, just because of that TPU mixed into the midsole. So I am personally a huge fan of the Saucony Ride 18. I think that it's going to be very versatile. I think it's kind of that one shoe that can do it all. I might be as bold to say that I already ran a half marathon in this shoe, but maybe a full marathon. I think like it was kind of at the point where, when I compared it in my head while I was running to a super shoe like the Tier Elite Carbon Valkyries, or I forgot the whole name for it, but that was the shoe I ran 2 marathons in. It might be crazy to say, but this is not that far off of it when it comes to a responsive feeling. That shoe, maybe, not the most responsive on the market, but when it comes to foams, like we're talking foam for foam, this shoe is not that far off. It's just, missing the plate, and then maybe this shoe is a little bit heavier because the uppers or the materials are a little bit heavier than the race day shoes that I talked about. But overall, I don't know. Like, I also am thinking, like, when I'm comparing this shoe, like a fair comparison for this shoe, I think this is what maybe New Balance tried to do with the Balos. And I might be, having some hot takes when I say that, because the Balos is $200. I think it's on sale now for around $160, which I think is definitely a better value. But when it comes to midsole performance, I think that this is what they kind of wanted, a little bit more of a bouncy feeling getting into the groove. Now the Balos does feel lighter on the foot, and maybe I'll make a whole comparison comparing the two. But yeah, just really boldly, I think that this can kind of punch above its weight class, if that makes sense. And I highly, highly recommend trying on the Saucony Ride 18 if you're looking for a daily trainer. And I would also highly recommend trying on the Saucony Ride 17, because maybe you can save a couple bucks, like I think $30 to $40 if you buy the Ride 17 instead of the 18. Just make sure that the difference in the upper isn't too big of a deal for you, and make sure that the midsole feels the same for you, because I don't know, for some reason it didn't for me. But it's been a while since I tried on the Ride 17, so that could be my mistake. So thank you guys so much for watching. I know this was a little bit longer than my typical reviews, but I had a lot of good things to say about the Ride 18. So thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for future shoe reviews, running videos, kind of all the above. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.